How did the 1950s deal with the lingering trauma of the Second World War? We tend to view the 1950s as a socially conservative and restrictive era, but the people at this time were using the powerful tool of group identity to try and bring back normality after the disruption of the Second World War. They dealt with the difficult aftermath of World War II by embracing different forms of social conformity and group identity. And we see this played out in three main ways. Most Americans pursued a suburban bourgeoisie lifestyle, full of consumerism and social compliance. However, this was not true for everybody. Many young urbanites embraced a neo-bohemian identity, and some, especially the academics in the upper middle class, followed a puritanical approach and embraced a Marxist identity. We're going to start by looking at the biggest of all of these groups, and that is the suburban communities. In the suburban communities, after World War II, the soldiers returned home to their wives and girlfriends and decided to move out to the suburbs to form new lives. This was the beginning of the suburbs as general, and many cultural shifts came along with it. For example, cars became a symbol of masculine identity. Television united Americans as they all were able to watch the same programs. Fashion and interior design became full of mass-produced goods, and considering processed food was recently invented and utilized during World War II, fast food chains like McDonald's quickly popped up that used this technology. But perhaps the most interesting part about this was through dating. Now, before World War II, dating wasn't really that common and people only did it with the intent to marry. But as Esther Gross says, quote, in the 1950s, casual dating was still a fairly new concept. But then continued, couples dated exclusively without thinking of long-term plans, end quote. What exactly is he saying here? Well, his point is that people no longer dated just to get married. It was a social construct and everybody needed to have a date. If you wanted to go out with your friends, you needed to have a date with you, as did everybody else. There are also many rules. Some of them included that a man always needed to ask the girl out, never the other way. He would need to meet her parents before the date, help the girl get into her coat and then hold the door for her, and whenever they went out for dinner, the man always paid for both of them. Now, this was a very important part of their lifestyle, and because they weren't dating romantically, things didn't always work out. But if they wanted to be included, they needed to have a date. So what would they do? Well, their solution was to carry little black books around with them. They were called such because, well, obviously, as their description, they were small and black, but their use was for that a man could write down the contact information of any girl he came across, so that, should he ever need a date, he would have plenty of people he could quickly call up and be able to join the social activities. But not everyone was very good at dating, and the government decided that the best way to deal with this was to make instructional videos on how to date and how one should properly behave themselves in a dating setting. And all of this accomplished one goal. It made the suburban communities embrace a group identity. Everybody was doing the same thing in the same way, and this group identity helped them cope with the trauma after World War II. But in the cities, many young urbanites took a different approach to dealing with the aftermath of World War II. The neo-Bohemian groups embraced anti-consumerism, a collective consumer culture, jazz, abstract art, beat poetry, but all of these are rooted in the same underlying impulses. And let me explain how. Take, for example, Jackson Pollock. He was a very, very well-known abstract artist, and he showed these the Bohemian values. He dripped, spilled, and threw paint across the canvas to create paintings that have sold for over $50 million today. But when you look at his art, it just seems to be random splatters, no real actual art in many cases. But he had a purpose in this. As a curator, James Johnson Sweeney called his work, quote, volcanic. It has fire. It is unpredictable. It is undisciplined. What we need is more young men who paint from inner impulsion, end quote. Even though his art seemed to have very little actual meaning beyond just paint across canvas, he was painting to reject the traditional values of the world around him. He did not want to be confined within the normal boundaries of art. And this was the exact mindset that many of his fellow Bohemian urbanites had. They rejected the consumerism and the lifestyle of the suburbanites. But this seems very antithetical to the overall point, in that it caused them to embrace the group identity. But in reality, their joint disapproval of the consumeristic society was what brought them together, causing them to create a group identity within, outside of the other group. And so, take for example, their return to jazz. They did not, during this time period, rock and roll became much more popular, but the neo-Bohemians preferred jazz and stayed with the old ways. Once again, we see them rejecting the world around them and instead creating a culture of their own. Because just like the suburbanites, they were trying to deal with the aftermath of World War II by creating a group identity. And the last way we see people creating a group identity and social collectivity after World War III is in the Marxist identity. Now, we tend to view the Marxism as like a bad thing, of course, and however it was in communism as bad. However, it was greatly prevalent in America during after World War II. Many Hollywood filmmakers, actors, and directors were arrested and put on trial on suspicion that they had communist sympathies. And this was certainly enjoyed by the consumeristic population, but among the Hollywood elites themselves, they joined together in their group identity of much more communist beliefs. So, what exactly did they believe in? Well, they supported self-denial, hard collectivism, which is effectively communism, materialistic ethics, subverting authority. They believed that they had a secret mission, and they supported aesthetics. Now, most of these are fairly self-explanatory, but I want to look at some of those that aren't as straightforward. In fact, they believed that they had a secret mission is rooted in the arrest and trials they were faced with. Everybody knows that young people love that, well, not just young people, but all people love the ideas of spies on a secret mission trying to uproot the government within. And this is effectively what these upper middle class and academics were doing. Their support for the Communist Party was quite obviously illegal, and they were on a secret mission to spread its ideals without getting caught. And then they also had a strong value on aesthetics, and this we see through the social realist movement. It was a political and artistic exploration during the 1920s and 30s. They created figurative and literal images of the masses. Because they were dissatisfied with the French avant-garde, this led them to search for their own isolation. They found their purpose and group identity in using art as a weapon to fight capitalism and promote fascism. These people used art and their aesthetics to promote their own ideals instead of the consumeristic ways that the government wanted. And once again, we can quite clearly see why so many members of Hollywood were involved. They were creating art, sometimes with and sometimes without communist messages hidden in them, on their secret mission to spread their values. And as one person said, quote, "It cannot be so very surprising that I adopted a communist viewpoint in the 1930s. So many of my contemporaries made the same choice," end quote. From the many pursuing a suburban lifestyle, to the urbanites embracing a neo-bohemian identity, to the academics and upper middle class following a puritanical approach, all searched for social conformity and group identity in the aftermath of World War II.